The very first words my son spoke that morning cut deeper than any knife. "Your room's for guests now." "Mom." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply smiled, because what he didn't know was that my first quiet move of revenge had already been set in motion. For 30 years, I poured everything into that house, into him, working double shifts, selling my own mother's heirlooms, even skipping medicine I needed, just so he could eat. And now the boy I raised into a man dared to turn me into a stranger under my own roof. But I wasn't the stranger. He was. He had forgotten who built the foundation beneath his feet. He thought I would leave quietly, like an old coat folded into storage. What I did instead changed everything. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, the son who thought he was the owner would be standing as my tenant. Subscribe now, drop a comment, and let me take you into my true story. I was not born into comfort. I was born into work, into silence, into sacrifice. The first time I held my son in my arms, Colorado's winter sun was breaking over the mountains. My breath fogged in the hospital window as I pressed my cheek to his. I was 19, barely more than a child myself, but I made a vow in that moment, no matter how heavy life became, he would never feel the emptiness I had felt growing up. I would give him warmth, even if I froze. I would give him food, even if I starved. I would give him dignity, even if mine was trampled. Those first years were hard. Snow blew through the cracks in the windows of our small cabin, and some nights the cold was so sharp it felt like glass cutting across my skin. I wrapped him in every blanket I had, pressing him close to my chest, listening to his small breaths while my own teeth chattered. When he slept, I prayed my body, heat would be enough to keep him alive through the night. Day after day, I worked. At dawn, I tied my hair back, pulled on thin gloves, and walked through snow that burned my ankles to reach the diner. The smell of grease clung to my uniform, my hands raw from scalding dishwater. I smiled at strangers, carried plates so heavy my wrists trembled, and tucked every tip into a jar that lived behind the sugar tin in our kitchen. That jar was our future. At night, when the diner lights went out, I started my second job, scrubbing floors in empty offices, bleach searing my nose, knees bruised against tile. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the polished glass doors, eyes bloodshot, hair falling out of its braid, and I almost didn't recognize the girl staring back. But I kept going, because when I opened our cabin door and saw him curled in bed, safe and dreaming, I knew it was worth it. I gave up little pieces of myself for his joy. I sold my mother's silver bracelets at a pawn shop to buy his first bicycle. He pedaled down the dirt road, cheeks flushed, laughter spilling into the air, and I stood there with tears hot in my eyes, because every clink of those bracelets had turned into freedom beneath his feet. Later, I sold my wedding ring to buy his textbooks. That ring had once meant promises. Now, it meant opportunity. I watched him carry those books under his arm, his shoulders squared with pride, and I told myself the sacrifice was nothing compared to what he would achieve. I often told him, "Don't worry about me. I'm strong. Just focus on your future." He never knew what that meant, how many meals I quietly skipped so he could eat more. He never knew the way hunger settled into my bones like a permanent tenant. He never knew how often I ignored the pain in my chest, the cough that rattled me at night, because every doctor's visit meant fewer dollars for him. I remember one Christmas more than all the others. I had no money for gifts, not really, but I found a used guitar at a second-hand shop. The strings were rusty, the wood scarred, but I polished it until it shone. I wrapped it in old newspaper and set it under the tiny tree. When he tore the paper away and strummed those first uneven notes, his eyes lit up in a way that made me forget the frost creeping under the door. That laughter, that joy. It was worth every hour I'd spent on my knees, scrubbing strangers' floors. The years stretched on, and so did the sacrifices. When he said he wanted to go to college out of state, my heart squeezed. I didn't have the money, but I told him yes anyway. I picked up more hours. I cleaned houses on weekends, scrubbing sinks that sparkled more than my own. I ironed other people's shirts, while mine grew thin with wear. I worked through fevers, through coughs that tore my throat raw, through nights when my vision blurred from exhaustion. I told myself my body could wait. His dreams could not. Every mother hopes her child will stand taller than she ever could. And when he came back from college, he did. He walked differently, straight-backed, sharp-suited, confident in a way I never learned to be. His voice carried the polish of classrooms I could never afford, and by his side was a woman whose hands had never known a day of work like mine. Her smile was sharp, her perfume heavy, her words smooth but cold. I thought for a moment that maybe it had all been worth it, that maybe when he looked at me, he would see not just a mother, but the foundation of his success. Maybe he would see the woman who worked herself into the ground so he could stand on solid earth. But I noticed things, little things, the way she wrinkled her nose at my cooking, the way he didn't correct her when she said, "We'll get this place fixed up properly," the way he seemed embarrassed when neighbors asked about my years of work at the diner. I told myself, it was just adjustment, that love can make people blind for a time. But the blindness lasted. He forgot the winters I kept him warm, with my own body heat. He forgot the jewelry, the ring, the meals I went without. He forgot the nights I came home limping, hands blistered, lungs burning, but still knelt by his bed to kiss his forehead. What he remembered instead was comfort, clean sheets, paid tuition, a roof he never worried about. And that comfort turned to entitlement. The house I fought to pay off, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, became a backdrop for his life, not a monument to my labor. The walls that held my sacrifices became invisible to him. And when I walked through the kitchen, I felt it. The shift, the way they looked at me not as a mother, not as a woman who had carried this family alone, but as something else. A burden, an obstacle. The cruelest part of sacrifice is this: if you give everything quietly, people forget how loud that gift really was. He saw only the ease I gave him, not the struggle behind it. She saw only the roof, not the storms I endured to keep it standing. And I began to realize, painfully, that the very things I gave up so he could thrive had turned me invisible in his eyes. But invisibility is not weakness. The sacrifices etched into my body, into my spirit, they were not scars of defeat, they were proof of strength. And one day soon, when he stood before me with words sharp enough to wound, he would learn that lesson the hard way. Because the mother who gave everything is also the woman who can take it all back. Your room's for guests now, Mom. He said it like a weather report, eyes on his phone, steam rising from his mug, as if the words didn't scald. I set my spoon down so quietly, the clink was louder than we all expected. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I watched the mountain light slide across the ground, and felt an old door in my chest close with a soft final click. It wasn't the first time I had been asked to
that's a new
express.
one.
It was just the first time anyone had tried to erase me from the space I built. The kettle hissed. The fridge hummed. The clock over the stove clicked each second into proof. He didn't look up. She did. Her perfume was the kind that hangs in the air, expensive and sharp, a floral that doesn't know when to leave a room. "It's not personal," she said, smoothing the sleeve of her cream sweater. "We're modernizing the house. A proper guest room, a curated experience. It elevates the property." I looked at the doorway to the hall, the place my hand had polished smooth on the frame, from years of passing through with laundry, with soup trays, with birthday cakes. I looked at the small dent near the baseboard, where his first bicycle had scraped the paint. Elevates the property. People who don't carry weight love the word elevate. So I asked the only question that kept my voice from breaking. "Where do you expect me to sleep?" He sighed, finally meeting my eyes as if I had forced him into a chore. "We talked about options. Remember? The basement is perfectly fine." Or, he let the word drift, tasting it like a favor. He might be owed. There's a very nice senior community on Oak Ridge. They have transportation, fitness classes. You'll make friends. I was still holding the spoon. My hand had gone numb around it. I set it flat on the counter and folded my fingers together. I didn't answer. The silence said everything. She laughed, light and low, the kind of laugh that would look good in photographs. It isn't exile, she said. Don't be dramatic. We just need the room for entertaining. People with our circle expect a certain standard. Our circle. I know those words. They look like a ring. They behave like a noose. He shifted, uneasy with the shape my silence was taking. You always told me, be independent. Build a life, he said, as if he was quoting me back to myself like a receipt. I did, I said, looking at the floorboards I had mopped with my aching knees. I built one. You're standing in it. He flinched. She didn't. Your quilts look provincial, she said, waving a manicured hand. We'll do linen, whites, fresh, the way people with breeding keep a home. The word landed on my skin like a slap. Breeding, as if I were livestock, as if the house knew the difference, as if the walls hadn't learned my name from all the nights I leaned on them to catch my breath after double shifts. I took one step toward the hall. The air felt colder there. The window at the end cast a rectangle of honest light across the runner rug. In that light, I saw dust floating like slow snow. I saw time. I saw my life hanging quiet in the air, waiting to be claimed. When I asked, the single word kept me from drowning. He relaxed, eager now that we were back in the land of logistics. We were thinking by the end of the week, he said. Plenty of time to move your things. We'll have cleaners come. A decorator. It'll be gorgeous. Gorgeous. I stood there and watched his mouth form that word, and wondered if he remembered the winter his fever burned so hot. I slept, sitting up beside him, changing cold cloths through the night, praying over each minute until the sun finally lifted the frost off the porch steps. Gorgeous didn't come to help me then. It never does. I turned, walked down the hall. My feet knew where every floorboard creaked. I had learned to step around them when he was a baby, so sleep could be the one luxury I gave him for free. The door to my room was half open, the way I always left it, so my old cat could push through with his head when he felt lonely. He was gone now. Some losses never announce themselves until they are baked into the habit of a half-open door. The room smelled like cedar and clean cotton. Sunlight sat on the bedspread in a square. The pillow was dented where my head had rested last night. On the dresser, the glass dish that held my rings glowed like a small lake. 3 silver hairpins lay long and thin across its surface, little bridges to nowhere. I sat. My knees protested. I pressed my palms to the blanket I had pieced by hand from scraps of old shirts, dresses that no longer fit, curtains that had seen better summers. That blanket held a map of our life, the red from the shirt he wore to his first school concert, the pale green from a dress I bought for a wedding I went to alone, the tiny navy floral from the curtains that once framed a cracked window in the kitchen. The seam near the edge had pulled apart where the fabric was thinnest. I threaded a needle. The thread slid through with muscle memory. I took the first stitch. People think strength looks like noise. I know it looks like a woman mending a seam with steady hands while the ground shifts under her feet. There was a soft knock on the door frame. He didn't come in. He leaned one shoulder to the wood and tried on a smile that didn't fit him. You okay? I took another stitch. The needle pricked my finger. A bead of blood welled up bright and precise. I pressed it to my tongue, tasted iron, swallowed it. I'm fine, I said. He looked relieved, as if my calm were consent. You'll see, he said. This will be good, for all of us. A fresh start. Fresh starts sound different when they mean eviction. She appeared behind him, looking into my room like a realtor appraising square footage. We'll repaint, she said, voice circling the space as if it were already hers. Dove gray. It makes rooms look bigger, and we'll store your things. The quilts, the figurines. Your kind of cooking leaves smells that cling. We need neutral. I stood. The needle was still between my fingers. My kind of cooking fed you both. The smells you want to erase kept this house warm when the furnace died. She smiled, lips tight. Don't make this emotional. We're trying to be practical. Practical is a word people use when they've already chosen comfort over kindness. He stepped forward, hands open. Mom, please. Don't turn this into a scene. I looked at him then. Really looked. The man whose first breath I had counted. The boy I had shielded from winter with my own body heat. His jaw was set like the granite. He was so proud of. He wanted a smooth ending he could frame, as mutual, as mature. He wanted the old woman to nod and leave. I nodded, but I did not leave. I walked past them into the hall, the scent of lemon cleaner lifting from the banister as my palm slid along the wood. I went to the linen closet, pulled down a shoebox I kept tucked behind the towels. Inside lay photographs, a spare key, and a small brass locket that had once held a lock of my mother's hair. I put the locket in my pocket. I put the key there too. He watched, confused, worried I would take something he imagined belonged to the new vision. I am taking something, I said in my head, but you will not see it. Not yet. In the kitchen, the kettle had cooled. The mug was a ring of brown on the counter, where a drop of tea had dried. I wiped it with a cloth. Clean is a language the house speaks. Anyone can translate if they try. We'll hire cleaners, she said, following me, as if I needed reassurance. Don't bother with chores. We'll handle it. I looked out the window. The neighbor across the street was sweeping her steps, her scarf a splash of berry against the snow. We had traded casseroles through hard winters, traded favors when one of us was sick. Community is built with small plates passed over fences, not with curated guest rooms. This is still my home, I said, turning back. My voice surprised even me with how level it was. I am not a guest. He shrugged, already weary of the conversation. It's just a room, he said. I didn't correct him. A room is never just a room. It's a container for the life that happened inside it. It remembers what people forget. They drifted away, satisfied they had delivered the news. Plans were mentioned. A painter's name. A decorator's Instagram. A list appearing in her notes app, like a countdown clock. When the house was quiet, I took a walk through it the way I used to walk through it at night, as he slept, checking locks, setting things right. My fingers skimmed the ridges on the door, jam where his height had been penciled in, uneven lines each birthday. My thumb found the nick in the hallway table, where we had set down a Christmas tree stand too hard. The air in the laundry room smelled like soap and damp denim. In the garage, the light flickered once, then steadied. The shovel leaned where it always leaned. The toolbox sat with its lid, closed like a held breath. I opened it. The metal squeaked, a familiar sound, a hinge that had learned our winters. Inside, beneath the socket wrenches and the measuring tape, lay a manila envelope with a rubber band slung tired around it. My name was on the front, in my own handwriting, the loop of the name braver than the rest. I didn't open it yet. Not there. Not with the cold pressing my cheeks, and the taste of iron still lingering where the needle had kissed my skin. I slid the envelope, beneath my sweater, warm against my ribs. Back in my room, I closed the door for the first time in years. The old cat would have complained. I pressed the envelope, flat on the quilt, and just looked at it. Papers don't look like power, until someone tries to take something they frame as theirs. Then the corners glow. I untangled the rubber band. Inside were the things people forget mothers keep. The deed with my name stamped where it matters. The letter from the bank, when I made the last payment. A copy of the will I wrote, after my sister died. The one that put this house into a trust with my signature stretched steady across the line. The tax receipts, crisp and sure, each one proof I had carried more than groceries in from the car. My breath left me in a long, slow stream. The window pane fogged and cleared, fogged and cleared. It felt like a heartbeat. It felt like a door opening somewhere I could not see. From the hall, her voice floated light as perfume. Can you heat the oven? We're having friends for dinner. I don't want the house smelling heavy. I set the papers back in order, slid them home, stood and smoothed the blanket with both hands. Heavy smells. The words made me smile, a small, private smile that didn't reach my eyes. The only thing that would feel heavy in this house soon would be the weight of consequence. At dinner, I cooked anyway. Habit is its own prayer. The onions hissed, the garlic softened, rosemary cracked in my fingers and released the kind of scent that says welcome in a language older than linen. She opened windows. He nodded along to something on his phone, about airflow. Our neighbors sat around the table, and I watched eyes travel, measuring. People sense weather long before it breaks. They praised the food in careful sentences, glanced at me to see where the gratitude should land, and I saw it in their faces, the knowing. People who belong to a place recognize the hands that keep that place. I saw it pass like a candle from gaze to gaze. He didn't see it. He was busy being elevated. When the dishes were scraped clean, and the silver clinked in the sink, I washed quietly, water hot enough to sting. She started a playlist. He laughed a little too loudly at a story that required no laughter at all. The night slid into itself. After they left, he stretched, satisfied, and said the new plan will make entertaining easier. Everything you've done will be appreciated more when it's streamlined, he added, trying to sound kind. Streamlined is the funeral clothes people put on a home when they're preparing to bury its memory. I dried my hands. The dish towel was thin in the middle, where 100 washings had worn it to softness. I hung it carefully. I turned off the light. The house exhaled. In my room, I opened the cedar box at the foot of the bed. Inside lay small anchors. The hospital bracelet from the day he was born, the stub from his first school concert, the letter he wrote me from college with coffee rings on the corner, a stain shaped like a moon. I set those aside and made space for the envelope. It slid into place like a key, finding the lock it was made for. The moon outside was thin and watchful. The mountains held their dark. The heater rattled, and then steadied. I lay down in the square of leftover sunlight, now pale with evening, and listened to the house breathe around me. I did not cry. Tears are for people who don't have a plan. In the morning I rose before anyone else. The kitchen was blue with dawn. I brewed coffee, the scent filling the quiet. I touched the edge of the counter, where a drop had dried last night, and found it clean. I opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. The air cut my lungs sweet and cold. Somewhere a plow hummed. Somewhere a dog barked once and fell silent. I looked at the sky, and then at my hands. The same hands that had mended, lifted, cooked, cleaned, signed, paid. The same hands that had held a fevered head and a deed with equal steadiness. A pair of magpies landed on the fence, black and white against the snow, heads cocked. They know the language of taking and keeping. My son's words from yesterday drifted back, dull now in the bright cold. Your room's for guests now. A sentence like a locked door. The wrong person thought he had the only key. I sipped the coffee and felt the heat move through me like a promise. I thought of the envelope resting in the cedar box. I thought of a phone number I had not dialed in years, a voice that had said, "If you ever need to formalize anything, call me first." I thought of the space on the wall by the front door, where a new frame could hang. Wood, not gold, holding a simple piece of paper that says who answers when someone knocks and asks for the owner. I went back inside. The floor was warm, where a heating vent whispered. I paused at the threshold to the hall, looked down at the place where the paint had chipped near the baseboard. The exact shape of that chip matched the notch in the wooden spoon I had used for 20 years. Some things in a home speak to each other. You just have to listen. They were sleeping in their big bed, doors closed. The house held them the way I once did. I let it, for now. I had no interest in shouting. I had every interest in signatures. I took a pen from the drawer. I took the envelope from the cedar box. I laid everything out on the kitchen table the way you lay out ingredients before you cook. Simple, precise, inevitable. And then I picked up the phone. Tomorrow, I stop being your mother and start being your landlord. I didn't storm out. I didn't raise my voice. That's the kind of reaction they expected, the kind they could label as stubbornness, as weakness, as proof that I was the problem. Instead, I went quiet. Silence is sharper than any blade when you know how to use it. The next morning, while they still slept behind their carefully curated curtains, I brewed my coffee and laid the manila envelope flat on the kitchen table. The papers inside whispered as I smoothed them out. The deed, the trust documents, tax receipts that stretched back decades, each one signed in my hand. I let my fingers rest on the deed. The ink might have faded, but my name was still there, steady, permanent. Not his, not hers, mine. I thought of every night I had counted out tips, of every ache in my back from scrubbing other people's floors. Every dollar had been carved into these walls, pressed into these floorboards. And now, with just a little patience, those sacrifices would become my weapon. I pulled out an old notebook I used to keep by the phone. Its cover was frayed, corners bent, but inside were names and numbers, some crossed out, some circled. My eyes fell on one in particular, a lawyer I had spoken to after my sister's passing, when I first placed this house into a trust. His card was still tucked between the pages. I remembered his words: "If anyone ever questions your ownership, call me first. Don't wait." I set the card aside. I wasn't ready to call, not yet. Revenge is like bread. If you pull it from the oven too early, it collapses. It needs time. Instead, I started digging. I opened the cedar box again. Alongside the photographs and keepsakes were old envelopes, folded letters, even receipts from when I had paid off the last of the mortgage. Proof, layered on proof. I spread them out on my bed like a quilt made of paper. Each slip was a stitch in my plan. The furnace kicked on, rattling the vents, but my focus didn't break. I traced dates with my fingertip, remembering the months that had nearly broken me. The winter I had pneumonia, but worked through it anyway, just to keep the payments steady. The summer the diner cut hours, and I scrubbed houses until my hands bled. Every hardship was here, written in ink and number. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was an archivist of my own sacrifice. When they woke, I was already gone. The public library smelled of dust and possibility. I claimed a corner table, spread my documents across its surface, and pulled out my reading glasses. The computer screen glowed cold and blue as I typed into the property records database. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from anticipation, and there it was, my name, still current, still listed as sole owner. A line of code on a government server that outweighed every cruel word my son had spoken. But then something caught my eye. A note in the record, a clause tucked into the trust paperwork. It was a sentence most people would skip, buried in legal language. But I didn't skip. I read it once, then again, then a third time until the meaning clicked. Any unauthorized alteration or claim against this property, without written consent from the trust holder, is invalid and subject to immediate reversal. Immediate reversal. The words glowed like fire on the page. That meant no matter what they tried, if they attempted to sell, to remodel, even to refinance, it would crumble the moment I said no. They thought they had cornered me, but the truth was, I had built the walls of this house higher than they could ever climb. I closed the file, gathered my papers, and held them tight against my chest. In the silence of the library, I whispered to myself, they don't even know the trap they've walked into. Back home, I moved quietly. I cooked meals, I washed dishes. I listened, as they talked about paint swatches, contractors, new furniture. Every careless word was fuel. She laughed about how outdated my curtains were, how my country taste dragged the house down. He nodded along, too busy imagining himself as the master of something he had never built. I smiled. I nodded. I let them think I was retreating. At night, when they slept, I worked. I copied every document, slipping the originals back into the envelope and placing the duplicates in a fireproof box I bought years ago. I called the utility companies and updated records quietly. My name reconfirmed, my authority sealed. I logged into the county assessor's website and checked tax status, current, paid, under me alone. The next step was insurance. I scheduled a meeting under the guise of routine renewal, but what I was really doing was reinforcing my standing. Paper trails matter. They are stronger than words spoken across a breakfast table. And then I visited the bank. The clerk smiled politely as she looked over the file. Everything checked out. Every account connected to the property flowed through my name. I left with copies, stamped and signed, proof that no one could sweep my ownership away. Each step was quiet. Each step was calm. To them, it looked like I was fading. To me, it was a gathering storm. But revenge needs more than proof. It needs precision. So I walked the house, room by room. I touched the walls, the doors, the windowsills. I asked myself, what is theirs, and what is mine? And the answer came clear, every time. This was all mine. One night, as they argued about centerpieces for the guest room, I sat in the living room chair that had molded itself to my shape over the years. My fingers drummed on the armrest, a rhythm I didn't know I remembered. I thought of the lawyer's card. I thought of the clause. I thought of the word tenant. A dangerous, beautiful idea settled in my mind like snow on a branch. I could let them stay, but not as family, not as owners, as tenants. Bound not by blood, but by lease. Bound to me. The thought made my chest ache, not from grief, but from something fiercer, justice. The next morning, I made the call. His voice was older now, the lawyer, but steady, professional. He remembered me. He remembered the way I had sat in his office, years ago, clutching papers, making sure my sister's estate was honored. I told him what had happened. I told him what they had said. I told him how they wanted me gone. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "They can't touch you. You're the sole owner, and if you want to formalize it, you can draft a rental agreement. Legally binding, enforceable." I closed my eyes, listening to the weight of those words. Rental agreement. Legally binding. Enforceable. When I hung up, my hand didn't shake. My plan was no longer just an idea. It was law, waiting to be written. That evening, as they laughed in the kitchen, I sat at the table with a blank sheet of paper. I wrote their names at the top. The pen felt heavy, powerful. I wrote the word, tenant. I wrote the amount for rent. Fair, legal, unavoidable. I signed my name at the bottom. The first draft of their new reality. I tucked the paper into the envelope, with the others. The seam pulled snug, as if the folder itself knew its role in this war. I looked around the kitchen. The cabinets I had painted, the counters I had scrubbed, the floor I had mopped on bleeding knees. This wasn't just a house. This was my legacy, my battlefield. And soon it would also be my victory. I stood at the window, watching the snow fall in steady sheets across the dark. Each flake landed quiet, unnoticed, but together they would bury the world. My revenge would be the same. They thought they had evicted me. What they never saw coming was that I was about to make them pay rent in the very house I built. The first time I slid the lease across the table, the paper made a sound like thunder in my ears. To them, it was just a sheet. Thin, white, fragile. But I knew better. It was the weight of every year I had bent my back, every coin I had saved, every night I had swallowed hunger. Now it was ink, law, and consequence. They looked at it the way a child looks at medicine. Unwanted, but unavoidable. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I just spoke with the calmness of a woman who already knows the outcome. "This is no longer a discussion," I said. "This house is mine. And if you wish to stay here, you'll stay as tenants." His jaw worked, the muscle twitching. He wanted to argue, but his eyes flicked over the signatures, the stamps, the proof. He knew better. She scoffed, muttered about humiliation, about how no one in their circle would understand. But humiliation is just another word for truth. Exposed. I set the pen beside the paper. sign, or pack your bags. For a long time, the only sound was the clock ticking. Snow pressed against the windows, muffling the world outside, as if even nature was holding its breath. Finally, he picked up the pen. His signature looked nothing like mine. Hesitant, forced, hers followed, sharp and angry, carving the page as though the ink itself might bleed. And just like that, the balance of power shifted. The next morning, I called the sheriff's office. Not for drama, not for spectacle, but for validation. The deputy came, a man who had grown up in this town and remembered when my boy was just a child in hand-me-down boots. He looked over the lease, nodded, and said, clear and binding, if they fail to pay or cause disruption, you call us. His words landed like bricks in the foundation of my plan. This was no longer just an idea. This was enforcement. I had copies made. One for them, one for me, one filed with the lawyer, one with the county office. I tucked mine into the cedar box, beside the deed. Paper became armor. Armor became weapon. From then on, the air in the house changed. The kitchen didn't smell of comfort anymore. It smelled of business. Each meal I cooked was no longer taken for granted. Each light left on, each faucet dripping, was a line in the ledger. I was no longer the invisible mother, keeping the machine running. I was the landlord tallying the costs. On the first of the month, I set the rent envelope on the counter. Their check appeared inside it. Late in the day, always silent, always grudging, I deposited it without comment. The slip of paper, another victory stamped and recorded. They hated it. She hated it most of all. I saw it in the way her lips pressed tight, the way her perfume grew sharper, as if she believed a stronger scent could mask her resentment. He avoided my eyes, retreating into his phone, his meetings, his excuses, but avoidance doesn't erase obligation. I started making small changes, subtle at first. I hired a property manager, an old friend from church whose husband had once built half the porches in our neighborhood. She came by, clipboard in hand, walking through the house with me. Together, we noted repairs, updates, maintenance. The language of ownership filled the rooms, and they had no choice but to listen. We'll replace the water heater next month, my friend said, jotting it down. And those gutters need cleaning before spring thaw. She was speaking to me, not them. Always me, because the landlord is the one who matters. The first time the plumber came, she bristled. Why didn't you ask us? She demanded. I sipped my tea, calm as the snow drifting past the window. Tenants don't make those calls. Landlords do. Her face flushed crimson. He stayed silent, and still the checks kept coming. But I didn't stop there. I placed an ad in the local paper. Rooms for rent, shared household, references required. Within days I had calls. Students from the college, a nurse who needed a place close to the hospital, a retired veteran with a pension. I scheduled viewings. She nearly choked when she saw strangers walking through the living room, admiring the space. You can't just invite people in, she snapped. Correction, I said softly. I can. 2 rooms were filled within weeks. The nurse took one upstairs. The veteran took the basement suite. Suddenly, the house pulsed with new life. Voices at the table, footsteps on the stairs, laughter in the evenings. The atmosphere shifted from tension to community, from ownership claimed by blood to ownership lived by right. And oh, how it burned her. She stopped cooking entirely, muttering that the smells clung to her clothes. He started staying out later, embarrassed to admit to his friends that the house wasn't his kingdom after all. But embarrassment doesn't pay the bills. Rent does. And each month, the envelopes stacked higher, proof that my plan was not just revenge, it was renewal. I began repairing what had been neglected. Fresh paint on the trim, a new coat of sealant on the deck. The garden, long choked by weeds, was cleared and replanted. I knelt in the soil, hands deep in earth, planting seeds while their eyes watched bitterly from the window. Every bloom that would rise come spring would be mine. not theirs. And still, the lease held. One evening, she tried again. "This is humiliating," she hissed, standing in the hall with her arms crossed. "You can't keep treating us like tenants." I looked her straight in the eye, my voice steady as stone. "You said my room was for guests. You turned me into a stranger. Now, strangers live here by my invitation. And you live here by contract." Her mouth opened, then shut. No words came. He turned away, shame painting his shoulders. That night, I sat at my desk, pen in hand, and wrote in my journal. Revenge doesn't always need fire. Sometimes it only needs ink. The months passed, and with them, their pride withered. The circle of friends they once bragged about stopped coming by. The gatherings dwindled. The whispers in town grew louder. People noticed. People always notice. And still, I stood tall. Each rent check was more than money. It was an apology they would never voice. It was a confession written in their own hand. It was justice deposited directly into my account. I stopped being invisible. I stopped being dismissed. I was the landlord. I was the owner. I was the woman who had built this house from dust and sacrifice. And now I was the one profiting from every stone of it. And as I watched them shrink under the weight of their own choices, I realized something powerful. The greatest revenge is not to drive them out. It is to make them live under the roof they once tried to take from me. Every day a reminder. Every payment a penance. Because I am not a guest. I am the one who decides who stays and who goes. And soon, very soon, everyone would know it. The day of the family gathering began like any other. Snow lay heavy on the ground, crisp and glittering, and the air smelled faintly of pine. The mountains stood tall behind the neighborhood, watching silently as if they knew what was coming. I had invited everyone, cousins, neighbors, even old family friends who hadn't stepped through this door in years. I cooked all morning, filling the house with the smell of roasting chicken, garlic, and fresh bread. Every dish was a memory, every spice a thread, tying me back to the years when this house rang with joy instead of tension. She fussed in the living room, rearranging throw pillows, spraying air freshener to mask the scent of my food. He scrolled on his phone, pretending not to notice the energy building in the air. By noon, the house was alive with voices. Coats piled on hooks, boots lined the hallway, laughter rose and fell like waves. People complimented the food, embraced me warmly, and asked after the garden I'd replanted. Their eyes flicked between me and the couple standing awkwardly in their own home. And the unspoken truth lingered in the air. Something was different. As the meal ended and plates clinked in the sink, he stood. His glass of wine caught the light. He cleared his throat, shoulders squared, preparing a speech. "We're so glad you could all join us today," he began, smiling wide, his voice carrying. "This house has been through many changes, and now it's finally ours to shape into what it was always meant to be." My chest tightened, but I didn't flinch. I let him dig his own grave, each word another shovel of dirt. He went on about renovations, about how they were modernizing the space, about entertaining their circle. His wife chimed in, nodding, adding little quips about decor and upgrades. Their tone was rehearsed, polished, like two actors in a play no one had bought tickets to see. And then came the line. "We've decided that moving forward, this home will reflect our vision. It's time for a fresh chapter." The room was quiet, too quiet. Neighbors shifted, cousins frowned. I felt the weight of every pair of eyes, waiting. I stood. My chair scraped against the floor with a sound that cut through his speech like a blade. I held the envelope in my hand, the same manila folder that had carried my sacrifices, my proof, my plan. "This is still my house," I said, my voice, steady, calm, louder than I intended. "And if anyone here has doubts, I have the papers to show it." Gasps rippled across the room. He froze, color draining from his face. She laughed, brittle and sharp, trying to mask the panic in her eyes. "Don't be ridiculous," she sneered. "No one wants to hear about paperwork at a family gathering." But people did. They leaned forward, curiosity burning. They had seen enough whispers, enough rumors. Now they wanted the truth. I opened the envelope and laid the deed flat on the dining table. The wood scarred from decades of meals, birthdays, storms weathered together. I smoothed it with my palm, letting the gold seal catch the light. "This deed," I said, "is in my name. It always has been. This house is not theirs to claim. It is mine." Murmurs spread like wildfire. A cousin near the back whispered, "I knew it." An old friend shook her head, muttering about ingratitude. He stepped forward, voice cracking. "Mom, this isn't the place." I cut him off, the way he once cut me off, at breakfast, when he told me I was no longer welcome. "No, this is exactly the place. You wanted to make me a guest in my own home. Now I will show everyone what you are in this house, tenants." I held up the lease, the signatures visible, their names etched in ink, beneath mine. My voice didn't waver. "Every month, they pay me rent to stay here. Every month, they acknowledge with their own hands that this roof is mine, not theirs." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, even a few laughs of disbelief. Faces turned to them, waiting for denial, for some shred of dignity, but none came. He looked at the floor. She flushed red, lips pressed thin. A neighbor spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension. "After everything she's done for you, this is how you treat her." Another cousin chimed in, shaking his head. Shameful, truly shameful. The tide turned in minutes. The respect they once thought they commanded evaporated under the weight of truth. And me, I stood taller than I had in years. I looked at him, my son, the boy I had carried, the man I had built. I kept my words, simple, sharp, unforgettable. "You tried to erase me from this house, but you forgot one thing. I am the foundation, and without the foundation, walls collapse." His eyes filled, not with tears, but with something heavier, regret. She couldn't bear it. She stormed down the hall, slamming the bedroom door, her perfume lingering like smoke after fire. He stayed, silent, trapped in the web of his own choices. The gathering didn't end in whispers. It ended in applause. Neighbors clapped, some even hugged me. Others shook their heads at him. Respect returned to me like a crown, placed back on my head. When the last guest left, silence filled the house again. But it wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful, the kind of silence that comes when justice has spoken. He stood in the doorway, shoulders slumped. "Mom," he said softly, voice breaking. "I never meant." I held up my hand. "Save it. Words are cheap. Rent isn't." And I walked away, my steps steady, the house echoing with strength instead of sorrow. Because that day, in front of everyone, the truth had been carved into stone. I was not a guest. I was not forgotten. I was the landlord, and they were tenants in the home I built. The morning after the gathering, the house felt different. The walls seemed to breathe easier. The air carried no tension, only the lingering scent of roasted garlic and baked bread. Outside, snow melted slowly in patches of sunlight, dripping from the eaves like a clock ticking towards spring. For the first time in years, I rose without heaviness, pressing on my chest. I brewed my coffee, sat by the window, and watched the mountains in the distance shift from gray to gold. They had always been there, steady, unchanging, and so had I. The house, once a place of whispered insults and stolen dignity, felt alive again. The tenants in the extra rooms greeted me warmly that morning. The nurse left early for her shift, thanking me for the tea I had made the night before. The veteran came upstairs, careful with his cane, and nodded with quiet respect. Their presence was not a burden. It was community, honest and kind. They knew who owned this house, and they honored it. Meanwhile, the two who had tried to erase me walked quieter now. Their steps no longer rang with confidence, but with hesitation. She stopped commenting on my cooking. He stopped making speeches. They understood that every plate they ate from, every light they switched on, every night they slept under this roof, was mine to grant. And I didn't have to remind them. The lease did it for me. I began to reclaim the spaces they had tried to take. The garden first, I spent hours outside, even with the cold biting my fingers, clearing weeds, turning soil, planting seeds that would bloom in spring. Each dig of the spade felt like cutting away the bitterness that had settled in me. Each seed was a promise, to myself, to the house, to the future. Neighbors passed by, waving, stopping to talk. They praised the courage I had shown, the way I had stood tall in front of everyone. Some told me I had given them hope, that they too had been dismissed, silenced, overlooked by their own children. One woman said, "You reminded us all real family respects you, not just your money." Her words sank deep. That was the lesson. That was the truth. Inside I painted. I chose warm colors, earthy tones that wrapped the rooms in comfort. I replaced old curtains with ones I sewed myself, patterns that carried memories, but also freshness. The smell of paint filled the house, sharp and new, erasing the perfume she once sprayed to cover my meals. I even fixed the crack in the hallway wall, the one I had ignored for years, too tired, too busy with sacrifice. I patched it, smoothed it, painted over it. The wall stood solid again, no scar left behind. As I stepped back to look, I realized it wasn't just the wall that was whole, it was me. They watched me change the house, but they said nothing. Their pride had been stripped bare in front of family, in front of neighbors. The shame was theirs to carry, not mine. And slowly, peace grew. The tenants brought life to the rooms. Laughter echoed down the hall again. The nurse shared stories from the hospital. The veteran told tales of long roads and hard lessons. We ate together sometimes, our voices mingling over the dinner table. No tension, no judgment, just respect. Money came in steady now, not from sacrifice, but from justice. Every rent payment was a reminder that my years of struggle had not been in vain, that I had turned pain into power. But the greatest peace came not from the money or the respect. It came from knowing I had finally drawn a line, a boundary carved deep as stone. I was no longer invisible, no longer dismissed. I had reclaimed my dignity, and with it, my freedom. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, my son joined me. He didn't speak at first, he just sat, eyes on the fading sky, the silence heavy between us. Finally he whispered, "I never understood what you gave up for me." I turned my head, watching the regret on his face. It was real, raw, but late, very late. I sipped my tea, let the steam rise between us. "You don't have to understand," I said softly. "You just have to live with the truth." He nodded, eyes glistening, and for the first time in a long time he looked like the boy I once held in my arms. The boy who had trusted me completely. But time had passed, and trust once broken is not easily mended. Still, I felt no anger anymore, only distance, distance that brought peace. The seasons turned, spring arrived, the seeds I planted burst into color, tulips, daffodils, marigolds, dancing in the breeze. Neighbors stopped to admire them, children plucked a few, running off with laughter. I didn't mind, flowers are meant to be shared. I walked the garden paths each morning, dew soaking my shoes, the air rich with life. The house stood strong, freshly painted, full of warmth, and inside, my heart felt lighter than it had in years. Sacrifice had shaped me, betrayal had tested me, revenge had strengthened me, but peace, that was my reward. I knew now that family is not bound by blood alone. Family is bound by respect, by loyalty, by love that does not measure worth in dollars or square footage. Real family does not evict you. Real family does not erase you. And as I watched the flowers sway in the mountain wind, I whispered the truth to myself. A truth the world needed to hear. Real family honors you. Always. If you've listened this far, then you already know the truth. This wasn't just a story about a house. It wasn't even about rent or leases or deeds. It was about dignity, about sacrifice, about the quiet strength of a parent who gave everything, only to be treated as disposable. Too many mothers and fathers know this pain. Too many give their lives away, piece by piece, until the people they raised forget the cost of every meal, every dollar, every sleepless night. But what my son forgot, what his wife could never understand, was simple. The foundation of any family is respect. I did not raise my voice. I did not beg. I did not leave. I stood my ground. And in the end, justice wasn't fire or fury. It was the quiet click of a pen on paper. The steady truth that cannot be erased. Real family honors you. Real family never evicts you. Have you ever been disrespected after giving everything? Share your story in the comments. And if you believe dignity always deserves justice, like this video and subscribe for more true stories.